The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky. I'm here with Justin Nassiri. Justin, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Justin, you're the founder and host of Beyond the Uniform. It's a top podcast on helping veterans find and obtain their ideal post-service career. You've also written multiple books on helping veterans to find an industry that's perfect for them, including the consulting industry. You've worked as a consultant yourself and still do. You have clients like Microsoft and Verizon. And so kind of before we get into all of that, you run the podcast, you're a principal consultant, and you also are a CEO of another company. So 3 different organizations. How do you manage all of these different roles?
It's funny because 3 or 4 years ago, my wife and I, we took this trip to India. We had a ton of time for reflection, and she works as an executive coach. And she was one of the perks of being married to her is she was trying out this framework with me. And we were going through a visualization essentially of what my ideal life would look like. And I'm a little bit ADD. I really like variety. And I had described her, I'm like, ideally, I'd be working between 3 different things and being able to split my time. And fast forward to now, that's essentially what I do. It is a challenge figuring out how to best deploy my time. And I try to balance it with, I'm pretty meticulous with my consulting engagements of tracking my time and seeing which projects are the most lucrative. But the podcast is much more of a creative outlet. It's starting to generate revenue, but it's much more about contributing back to the military community. As I'm sure you can relate to with your own podcast, I really enjoy meeting new people. And so I view that a little bit more as putting gas in the gas tank. And the tech company that I run, fortunately, doesn't require a lot of time. So it is sometimes a struggle, but I try to keep my focus where I generate revenue while still having a couple other pursuits that creatively give me energy and help me meet new people.
So I was going to say this for later on, but I think let's just get right into it because there's probably lots of listeners going, Michael, like ask Justin more about this. And that is, you said you're meticulous with your time tracking, looking at projects, looking at clients, identifying, kind of analyzing profitability of each project. How do you approach that? Like, first of all, what are you using? What tool are you actually using to track all that?
So I have a tool I probably should use called Easy Hours. And I kind of fall in and out of love with different tools. I honestly, right now, I have a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and I use my stopwatch on my phone. I'll say, and I just update the spreadsheet with how many minutes, and I'm constantly tracking my effective hourly rate because most of the work I do is we'll probably get into this. I try to do things project-based as much as possible because I find my effective hourly rate is much higher than if I charge an hourly rate. But I'm literally just updating the spreadsheet, one, to get a sense of, I'll classify a project and I'm still diversifying what I do. So I try to figure out, okay, when I do a financial model, how much time does that typically take? If I do a business plan, what does that take? If I do market research, I'll also classify it by client. So when I have repeat engagements, I start to know typically how long a client will take. But I'll also add that given that ADD aspect of myself, part of my intention in turning on that stopwatch is it's a very subtle way for me to not check email, to not get caught up in another task, to just set this mindset of like, I'm very influenced by Cal Newport's deep work. So in that book, this principle of, okay, I really want to go deep on this client. I want to give them my full undivided attention. And it does help me avoid checking text messages, checking Facebook, all the little time that sucks that don't really add value in my life.
And when you have that kind of that calculation, or you have everything written down, how does it influence your decision making around, like, have you ever found that certain types of projects or certain types of clients are not as profitable for you and therefore you don't seek those, or you say no to those opportunities going forward?
I think the biggest thing it helps with is now when I have, I'm sure we'll talk about customer acquisition, but now let's just say someone comes and says, hey, I would like your help with a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people will start with an hourly rate. And what I'll usually say is like, hey, let's do this as a project. I do that for X. And the way that I get to X, honestly, is I average in the spreadsheet, it actually averages out, okay, every business plan I've done, how long does it take? What is my aspirational effective hourly rate? And then therefore, what do I want to charge? And so that's usually what I'll throw out. And the reason why I like that is I'm sure like you, I'm very fast. I'm very efficient. I'm very good at the things that I'm good at. And I don't want to be penalized for doing quick work. And I find that most clients, they're not going to pay, depending on the channel where I acquire a client, it's difficult for most people to justify spending over $100 an hour. I talked to a good friend of mine from business school. He hired an editor. He does a lot of writing. He hired an editor, and he said, this is a couple months ago, he said, this person's exceptional and they charge a lot more than I would ever pay. And I was like, how much is that, by the way? This guy's very well off. He goes, oh, it was $100 an hour. I'm like, oh man, I want to be earning way more than that. And so I really want to back into something that works out to a good hourly rate for me and is palatable for my client. And that's where that project-based fee comes in for me.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. A good idea for people who maybe are using hourly fees, or even if you're not using them, but just to, I went through this exercise with several clients in our coaching program recently where, they didn't actually know which projects and which clients are most profitable. And so by just kind of starting to really analyze and look at how you're spending your time, it can help you to make better decisions and also to ensure that you're maximizing your fees in all instances. Okay, so this is great. Now let's look at, I want to go back in time a little bit because you actually started off at McKinsey, I think back in 2008 or so as an associate. What lessons did you learn working in an environment like that you're still using to this day?
So for context for listeners, I was in the Navy. I got out. I went to business school at Stanford. And then while I was there, I interned with McKinsey. And the full story is better told over a beer, but I accepted an offer with them to return to their New York office. And this is in 2009, so when the economy tanked. So I had about 9 months between graduating Stanford and starting at McKinsey. And in those 9 months to kill time, I started a company just for fun. And that actually grew into something that I fell in love with. And I ended up going to the startup instead of going to McKinsey. And so most of my experience there was in that internship. And I just point this out for listeners because especially if any of them are considering going to a larger company or a smaller one, I'm very happy with where I've ended up, which we'll talk about as a blend of entrepreneurship and consulting. And there's part of me that always wonders, like, oh, what would it have been like had I gone to McKinsey for 2 or 3 years? Now I'm 39 years old, maybe the wisdom that age brings. I realize I was very much in a rush to do something rather than just kind of viewing it as building blocks. And so what I learned in my internship, and I know I would have learned more of, was first of all, the learning that comes from working with unbelievably exceptional people. And one of the consultants I worked with on one of the projects, I remember he was like, this is way before Tim Ferriss and all of that stuff. He was telling me he shut down his email because he's like, I realize that when I check my email, I lose not only the time of checking the email, but it takes me 1 minute and 30 seconds to get back into my workflow. And it was just like, I'm like, wow, this person's high achieving. And it's little tiny tidbits like that I picked up. And then, of course, there's the work itself of learning to interview clients, learning to present polished material to them, learning to instill confidence, a lot of financial spreadsheet type of work. And so even though it was an abbreviated time, one of the things that I appreciated about that as a career path is because the work is so intense, you're drinking from a fire hose and you're learning a lot very quickly. And so in my path, most of what I've learned by doing and by making mistakes. And I do have some longing to have had a longer stint with McKinsey to learn those best practices and just brush shoulders with great people from whom I would have learned a lot from.
And what's one thing that you're glad that you aren't doing right now that you think if you were still in that environment, like, you escape the corporate walls, you're doing your own thing. What's one kind of thing that stands out that, oh yeah, this is way better than it would be if I was working in that type of environment?
Is 100% autonomy. And I have built my life again in some values work I did with my wife. I realized one of my biggest values is autonomy. I love being able to do things when I want, how I want, where I want. And I'm fortunate to have built a life around this. And I know that, you're going to Mexico, you're doing the same thing. I love, right before this, I was spending time with my 11-month-old son, and I had 20 minutes to just kind of play with him. And I work from home because I want that. And we live here in Denver. We love Steamboat Springs. My wife's family has a house there. So we'll go and I'll work remotely there. And oftentimes on a Wednesday afternoon, we'll go to Costco and there's no one there. There's no traffic. And I'll work a little bit more on Saturday. And so all of this is to say, I love efficiency. I love autonomy. And I think it would have really bothered me, especially at this point in my life, if I was flying somewhere all the time, if I was away from my family, if I needed to work, 8 to 11 p.m. I would much rather have control. And I'm willing to sacrifice perks and benefits and salary and notoriety in order to have a life that's more aligned with my personality.
Yeah, I think that resonates with a lot of people, and certainly, many aspects of that with myself as well. So, Justin, I want to get into your background and your story, from the Navy and the connection to the work that you're doing now. But before we do that, let's kind of get people, I want to set the stage in terms of some of the consulting work that you do, because you're a principal consultant at Transparent Technologies, right? Where you've worked with clients like Microsoft, Verizon, Comcast, a whole bunch more. Tell us, how did you actually go about getting those clients? What did the path look like from, you said, Navy and McKinsey and then entrepreneurship? How do you actually go about acquiring clients like Verizon, Microsoft, and Comcast?
So the ironic part here is that in my company story box, and we grew this marketing technology company from 0 to over 100,000 in monthly recurring revenue. All of that was built on the backbone of sales outreach. And I have so much knowledge around scalable ways to go from cold email outreach to meetings to closing. And I love that. And I have not done any of that with consulting. And I will be very vulnerable with listeners and give them the behind the scenes look. I started consulting just because I wanted to make some money on the side. This was a little over a year ago. And at the time I still use a lot Upwork to hire people. I've probably hired over 50 different people for different tasks on Upwork. And I don't even know what led to the realization, but this was the slippery slope for me, where I actually decided, why don't I actually just work on Upwork? It seems like a credible marketplace. And my thesis was, there's a lot of low skill labor there, which is great. I love it. There's probably not a lot of Stanford MBAs. There's not a lot of McKinsey consultants that are on that platform. So maybe I can differentiate that. And that started me on a platform of going to many marketplaces like that. I got Microsoft. I just had a call with them today. I'm doing my 13th engagement with them. I found that relationship through Upwork. It's mind-boggling for me.
So just to clarify, so someone from Microsoft was looking for help in what area?
Let's see. The very first one I think they posted was in the market research genre. And it was essentially, we are considering a product in this space. We want to know the competitors, best practices, white space. We want to know how we would go to market there. And I was, at the time, I've gotten more sophisticated. At the time, I came from 10 years of entrepreneurship, this mindset of entrepreneurship for me is you got to figure stuff out. So I had this mindset at the time of whatever it is, I can figure it out. And that happened to be in my sweet spot, which is wow, I brought new products to market. I'm very good at figuring out what's going on, what the competitive landscape is. That's essentially a critical component of founding a tech company. And so that has become one of the staples that I really enjoy, is that sort of market research or competitive analysis or new product entry into a market, things like that, where it's very exciting to learn something new and work pretty quickly on bringing a solution to them.
So Microsoft posted this job. They said, we're looking for help in this area. You, amongst other people, then responded to it and said, hey, I can help you with that. Is that essentially how it went down?
It was, yeah. And we can go as far down the rabbit hole as you'd like, but essentially I would be spending time every day looking for new job posts, and you can filter them. You start to get a little bit sophisticated in knowing where your sweet spot is. And I just read an article about how Upwork has something called Upwork Plus and Upwork Enterprises. It was in the back of my mind, this thought that like it's a more rigorous evaluation to work for an enterprise client. But when you're once you've done one project with an enterprise, you get fast tracked for every job they ever post, which has very much been true. So I was in this mindset of like, whatever I need to do to get an enterprise client, I'm going to do that. And I saw one of the postings and I didn't know it was Microsoft. It just said enterprise client. And I applied and I was fortunate to get that first job. And then once I started the conversation, I realized, oh, this is actually Microsoft.
What was the process like? So when they, initially said, okay, we're interested, was it just you and they hired you, or did you go through a quote unquote kind of interview process?
Almost always on Upwork and Catalant and all the platforms that I use, it's very similar. It's the first step is you submit a written application. And what I have found is that there is a significant advantage to being close to the front. And most platforms will tell you.
Meaning what? Meaning?
The first to apply.
Got you. Okay.
And so most platforms will tell you how many applications. And for me, specifically with Upwork, if a job post has more than 10 applications, I usually won't submit. Just because I have a pretty high hit rate. If I apply, I have a higher probability that I get accepted at this point because I have really good ratings. But I've also found when I hire, if I get 10 or 11 applications, I'm not really scrutinizing them that much. I'm usually looking at the rate. I'm just dismissing people. And the second part of that is I try to spend 5 or 10 minutes, which is a lot of time in my perspective, on the application. And it's pretty detailed, right? I'll look at the job post, and if I think I can add value, I'll try to give them almost like 10 minutes of consulting of like, hey, here's your project. This is exactly how I would approach it. Because I've also gotten so many applications on these platforms, most of them are cut and paste. That's one way to differentiate. So once you submit that, and for anyone going down this route, I would just say one thing here. You have to assume. So I've posted so many jobs on Upwork to hire someone. I would say probably 1 out of 5 jobs I post on Upwork, I actually hire. I get excited, I post the job, and then I just lose interest and I move on. You have to kind of have that mindset that 4 out of 5 of the jobs you apply to, it has nothing to do with you. It's just really easy to post a job. So don't take it personally. Like everything else, it's a numbers game. So I'll submit the thing, and more and more now I use Calendly for scheduling. More and more now in it, I'll say like, let's talk for 30 minutes, schedule a time here. That way we don't even have to have any back and forth. They can schedule the time. And I would say almost without exception, I'll get on the call with someone. I don't think there's been maybe 1 or 2 examples where someone hired me without actually talking. Maybe we have some back and forth messaging. But part of my intention in talking to them is obviously selling myself, but I want to make sure that I've priced the proposal right. So if it's an hourly, it's now the process of convincing them to do a project-based. And if it's a project-based, I'm getting a sense for them of like how needy of them are they as a client. Like some of these people, and I'm very deliberate, like 30 minutes, no more. Some of these people go on, and I'm like, oh man, not only do I need to include my time estimate for the work, I got to do some client management here. So I'm going to probably be hopping on calls with this person, just things like that. One of the things I like about using these marketplaces, it's, that they have a need.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching. So, Jess, let me ask you this, because I think the common question, this is really great information because it's a different perspective, I think, than what is typically out there, right? A lot of people look at platforms like Upwork or whatever it is and go, yeah, but that's just for like low value kind of, labor, and going on to a platform like that is going to diminish my authority and expertise. But here you are, you've essentially proven that wrong. You've made it work. You've landed, well-known clients, which now allows you to use the logos on your website. You have some testimonials from them, right? That builds and creates all kinds of opportunities. So give us kind of an insider look into the actual value of these projects. I mean, are we talking about like $1,000 and $5,000 projects, or some of these projects turning into larger projects? Just kind of give us a sense of what this actually looks like. While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
So my best guess on Upwork in particular is that most buyers will not spend over $100 an hour, and most projects will not exceed $3,000 to $4,000. Now, bear in mind, there's been multiple clients, so you just need to shift your thinking into chunking projects. So either that's like Microsoft, where now, like the guy I talked to today, the application was pretty simple. I said, hey, I have done 12 projects with your team. All of them are 5 stars. Here's the name of individuals. And he actually went to one of the guys and checked me out. Like, he's like, yeah, I work with this guy. He said great things. And now we're working together. So that's one option. Another option is I use business plans because they're so simple. Like, hey, let's start with the business plan. Okay. And then now you need a financial model. I can help you with that. Hey, you need your marketing strategy. I can help you with that. So you just start to expand in a couple $1,000 chunks. That's Upwork, but I do want to highlight for listeners, Catalant is another platform, and there the price point can be significantly more. There are $20,000 contracts, there are $100,000 contracts. My sense is that whereas Upwork is a lot of individuals and some enterprises, Catalant is usually a private equity backed company or larger. So the advantage is very sophisticated buyer with large budgets. The downside is I'll see a new relevant job opportunity on Catalant every 3 to 5 days. I could spend all day on Upwork checking every 2 or 3 hours, and there's just so much volume.
Nonstop, right? And how does it work in terms of the fee? So if you land, let's say, a $3,000 project through Upwork or whatever platform it is, typically how much of that are you keeping yourself?
So for the projects, if it's something like over $1,000, they take 10%. I think if it's lower than that, they take 20%. Catalant varies. It can be as high as 25%. And I just landed a large contract and negotiated the client to drop that to 20%, which was this weird 3-way conversation with Catalant. I think for me, just from doing so much sales, 20% referral fee to me is just table stakes, especially on this larger product. It really irked me, but I'm having to remind myself of man, if someone brought me a client for 20%, great. I don't enjoy sales. I don't enjoy that outreach. So the time that I can spend working and doing something I enjoy, great. 20% is a drop in the bucket.
And once you establish that relationship with a client through Upwork or whatever platform, can you move that off of that platform, or are you legally kind of bound to keep that within the platform?
I often have people on both platforms. I take it as a favorable gesture when they're like, hey, you seem like a good guy, especially with the Navy background. They're like, I'm happy to do this off Upwork or off Catalan or whatever else it is. I'm a little bit vain about reviews. And I think that that's smart for both of these platforms, that they show how much you've earned, how many hours, all of these things. I may be over imagining. I do think it matters. Like on Upwork now, it shows like, I don't know, 60 projects, over 200 hours worked. I'm like wanting to get that higher and higher. So for me, most of the time, there's been a few exceptions. Most of the time, I'll keep it on the platform. Certainly for the first project, sometimes for the follow-on project, they'll just come to me directly. But I think that most of us have more to gain by playing the long game of building up a really solid resume and referenceable profile. And that just means keep the stuff on the platform and eat the cost.
Awesome. Okay, good. This is really valuable. I appreciate you sharing this because we haven't really touched on this topic on the podcast. Again, I think there's some opportunities. Before we move on, just regarding platforms like this, what's the downside? What have you found that maybe isn't as good or you don't enjoy in comparison to just working with a client directly and doing the direct sales to the client, landing them as a client, so forth? What stands out to you?
So let me just highlight two of the things I really like apart from the deal flow. I like the security of just, not that I ever have concerns about people paying or things like that. It does add that. And because autonomy is so important and I do a lot of other stuff, I like that if I'm going to like a workshop for a week, I just won't apply to new jobs. I'll start to taper things down. So I really like that aspect. The flip side of that is sometimes I feel like a mercenary, and it does get tiring where it's like, when I'm in the zone, I'm applying to jobs every day. And because these are like a couple $1,000 projects, they're pretty short in nature. It's like I'll doing multiple ones of these for a 1 week span. And so it's like you always have to feed the hopper. The one that I landed on Catalan is the first one where it's like a year long. There's like smaller chunks, but the intention is to go for a year. And I'm realizing I need to change my portfolio to have a few of those foundational clients. And the one platform we didn't talk about, the one I've had the least success on, is one called TopTal. The advantage there is that they're specifically designed for like longer term ongoing projects. And I've really shied away from that because I get, my hackles start to go up and I just think like, I don't want to be locked in, I don't want to be on a product management call every morning at 9 a.m. That's not why I'm doing this. I want my freedom. So I've kind of avoided longer term things like that. But I do think there are ways to find clients who are longer term, who are still in alignment with what I'm looking for.
Got it. So one of your specialties, one of the things that you focus on is helping veterans as they're transitioning out of the service right into kind of civilian careers and lives, is to get those jobs. And I guess part of that is also people getting into consulting. What advice do you have for someone who's new or maybe has just come out of the service and they're kind of weighing their options, considering if they want to get into consulting? What would you say to them? Would you suggest that they should start by really thinking about jumping on some of the platforms that you've mentioned here, or would you tell them to do something else first?
I think definitely something else. I think that the nice thing is what I say doesn't matter because it truly is a marketplace. And the market will tell you if they value your skill set. When I look back on after 5 years with submarines, there's nothing really marketable there that I could position on Upwork. Now, after I got my MBA, I still don't have a lot of skills. I can apply to help someone with their resume, things like that, right? It's not lucrative, but at least I've got some defined skill set. And with rare exception, most of the veterans I know, they don't leave the military with a marketable skill relevant to a platform like Upwork that is much more civilian workforce focused. But my biggest advice is, and I've done 330 interviews on podcasts with people about their career, and my own experience is too, when you leave the military, there is so little insight into what's out there. And I would imagine if you do have veterans listening to this or people in the military, the consulting slice of the world that they know is the Booz Allen Hamiltons of the world who focus on government contract consulting, which is such a tiny slice of the pie there. And so anything that they can do to raise awareness to all of the different types of consulting, the different industries, the different functions, and letting them know that there's a lot of options and that both LinkedIn and Glassdoor are their friends in terms of finding out people with their backgrounds and the types of companies they work at. And then also setting expectations for what do people make there, which is another trend I've seen is that veterans don't really, they tend to overestimate their expectations. But the one last thing that I would say is going to a consulting company for anyone, veteran or not, is such a good way to get exposure to what size company do I like, what industry do I like, what functional roles do I like. It's just a way to get a lot more data quickly to better inform what do I want to do next.
You mentioned that sales and marketing is an area that really kind of gets you going. It's something that you've done a lot on the technology side. Give us just a very, quick, maybe a couple of tips or a few things that you found to work exceptionally well for someone that wants to set meetings, to have appointments, to get in front of ideal clients. What are a few things that you, again, have found to work well?
So I'll preface this by saying if people Google Katie Horgan, and Michael, I'll send you the article, Katie Horgan Medium, it should be enough. A friend of mine wrote an article on how she got more clients than she can handle through email outreach. And that is on my to-do list eventually. It's just I've had so much good deal flow through the platforms. I haven't really gone to direct outreach yet, but I hope to do that soon.
But you mentioned on the tech side that you did a fair bit, right, to get your company there.
So what I did at Storybox eventually was I had a team of 5 dedicated salespeople, and I eventually found them all jobs elsewhere, and I replaced them with essentially automated systems with Upwork and a couple of platforms. And what I really like to do is start on LinkedIn. And I live and breathe by the LinkedIn search criteria. So I always start with, if I don't know who I'm going after, and I'll generate pretty discrete lists that I will then hire someone on Upwork to get me their email addresses. But what I'm always keen into here is, what is the company size? Right? Like for me, I'd probably target 11 to 50 employees or maybe 51 to 200. I have some thesis there. I would target specific industries. I would target specific titles. I would target specific geographies. And I actually do this as consulting projects for people, but I'll actually create spreadsheets where the way that I pitch this to them is, yes, meetings is one outcome of this, but data is an equal outcome. Because not only are you getting meetings, but I set up the spreadsheet to show them like, hey, this is limited data. This is more art than science, but it seems like VP level people are taking meetings. It seems like this industry, did you know that most people are responding? Your highest meeting rate is coming from Cincinnati. And what that allows us to do is be like that heat-seeking missile, and then say, okay, the next batch of leads that I'm going to send over to Upwork are going to be Cincinnati-based. We're going to test out that hypothesis. And so there's platforms you can use. The probably most cost-effective one is called reply.io. And what I like about this, the poor man's version is you track all this in a Google spreadsheet. One step up is using a system like reply.io, where you essentially spend some time crafting really good and specific email templates. You'll come up with 5 or 6 touch points. At Storybox, I surprisingly found that most people responded after 4 or 5 emails spread out over the course of months. So persistence does pay off. And the nice thing is you can do the effort once and then it will handle the automated follow-up. But one last thing that I'll add there is, and this is where that Katie Horgan article does a really good job, the degree to which you can templatize 80% and customize 20%. And you can literally do that with a spreadsheet field where the field is 2 sentences. Hey man, I saw you're in San Francisco. Did you check out this restaurant? I love that you worked at this company. Just anything to show them it's not spam, even though it is spam. That's a scalable way to automate this.
I think one thing that you've mentioned, Justin, like a couple of times is the thesis. When you're starting this process, you don't have all the answers. And I think a lot of consultants, when they're considering marketing and doing more outreach, one thing that holds them back is the feeling like they don't have all the answers. They're not sure exactly who they should be targeting or exactly what to say. And, they want everything to be perfect. But the reality is that quote unquote perfection or the greater levels of clarity come from actually doing the outreach. And then, as you said, as you start to see who's responding and what kind of response they have, that can then tell you, what they care about, how to adjust your messaging going forward. And so I think that's really important that you shared. And I definitely want to second that, is for anyone who's feeling like, well, I don't know exactly who to target. You don't need to know, right? As Justin's shared, it's really about building your hypothesis, having that thesis and then starting to test against it. And the sooner that you do that and the more that you do that, the better you'll be able to tighten everything up.
And I'll just add a quick anecdote here. So one of the best things I did when I was at business school at Stanford was I took a course at the Stanford Design School. And the very first day of that course, our first assignment was to do a 5-minute prototype reinventing ramen cup of noodles. And the reason why they really hammered this home about these 5-minute prototypes was they wanted to bias towards action. They knew if you have 2 weeks, you're going to delay, you're going to, first of all, spend too much time. And second of all, you're going to fall in love with your thesis and you're going to start to exclude really valuable information. And so what we would do is we'd do that 5-minute prototype. We'd actually go and have people use it. It's just a cardboard thing, but just pretending type of thing. You learn a lot and you realize like, wow, people don't want a new cup of noodle. They want a new spoon. And if I had spent weeks and weeks and weeks spending money and time perfecting this cup of noodle, I might not follow that critical insight. And so it's really this whole concept of rapid iteration, moving quickly, learning and tweaking. And that's been the bedrock of my experience on everything, is like, just move quickly, learn, make educated decisions, realizing it's not permanent, realizing it's art, not science, and just move and iterate as quickly as possible. I like to do that with my clients too. That's one of the things I filter for, is like, hey, I can wait a month and give you McKinsey level pretty slides. I'd much rather meet in 48 hours, give you drawings and sketches, but get your feedback and tweak and optimize. That's going to lead to a lot better outcome than that month long in isolation.
Definitely. Justin, we're coming up to time here, but do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about the transition a little bit from the Navy. So you worked on nuclear submarine, right? And then as you kind of moved us through the different stages, but you have a podcast. It's a top rated podcast. I think it's even number one in its category, called Beyond the Uniform. And one thing that really stands out about that is it seems like you've cultivated, you've created a very strong sense of community amongst veterans. And that, even for someone who's not a veteran or has never been in the military, I think the idea of community is very powerful with our clients, with our greater kind of community and relationships. Just talk to us a little bit about like what you've done specifically to foster and cultivate that level of community and involvement where people really want to help each other out.
The fortunate thing for me is, so one of the disadvantages of doing all of this work in a niche space like military veterans is it's a very tiny audience size, right? Like 200,000 people every year transition out of the military. If I get 100% market share, it's still not compelling numbers for a podcast. The advantage is the military community is so exceptional at paying things forward. And so when I get guests on the show, it's like I just had Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who wrote Extreme Ownership. They're so gracious, so generous with their time. It's that thought of like, oh, you're helping veterans. Okay, I'm there. And that's also true of the audience, is like, the downside is they're not going to spend money. I can never monetize my audience directly. The upside is when you do things like, hey, leave us a review on iTunes, or tell your friends, or spread the word on the base, or help us with this, they're pretty responsive and they're willing to take action. So I haven't spent nearly as much time fostering the community as I'd like. There's always, because this is a passion project, I'm always purposefully limiting my amount of time on it. If I had 100 hours, I would love to it would be a vacation for me to just do things like putting together a private Facebook group, or just, there's so many things we could do to strengthen that community. But especially now having a small kid, I have to come back to like, hey, it essentially still a level of charity. And I don't want my charity to come at the expense of providing for him. And so as much as I'd love to deepen that community until I find like a sustainable business model, I'm trying to, limit it to just a couple hours a week.
Got it. I want to make sure that people can learn more about all of your work, Justin, because you've written several books, you have the podcast, you got a lot of good stuff going on. So just take a moment and let us know where's the best place for people to go to learn all about, the world of Justin Nassiri.
Oh, wow. I'm now realizing I should have a better way of capturing this. The main website that I use is transparenttech.io. That's kind of the foundation of my consulting work outside of the platforms that I mentioned. LinkedIn is pretty good as well. That has links to the podcast. It has, I believe, links to all the books that I've written. And if the books aren't on Transparent Tech, I'll do that. But if you Google or search on Amazon, they're very fun projects. I love nerding out on data. And so I've just done a lot with, for example, I wanted to understand what Gary Vaynerchuk did on Twitter to make him so successful. So I did a statistical analysis of 12 months of his tweets to figure out when he tweets, how he tweets, what he tweets. It was a lot of fun, and I put it together in a book. And I've done similar approaches like that. But transparenttech.io, or it's Justin at transparenttech.io, or find me on LinkedIn. And if you send me a message, I'll respond there too.
Sounds good. Well, we're going to have all that linked up. Justin, again, thank you for coming on the show and for sharing all those lessons with us here today.
Thank you. It was fun to be on the other side of the microphone. I just really appreciate your generosity to have me on the show.
Good stuff. Thanks again.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.